So thank you so much for coming. My name is Monica. I'm the Director of Open Policy Development at Cambridge University Press. I've been in post for 3 months, and during that time we published a white paper, the Cambridge Publishing Futures Report. And really the presentation today sort of stems from the bits of the findings in the report about open access business models in particular, although I'll gesture to the general findings. Because of that, I really wanted to make sure that for this session there was a librarian to talk about open access business models. So I will talk about the Publishing Futures Report, what we did, what we found, again, gesturing generally to our findings and then zooming in on kind of open access futures from the business side. I'll then hand over to Doug to give his 10 minutes on open access business models. We'll talk together and then we'll open it up. So, back in March of 2025, our managing director, Mandy Hill, made an announcement that we were going to do a big analysis of the open access, open research publishing space. And the reason for this is that at Cambridge, we had invested and have invested and will continue to invest in moving as close as we can to a fully open access business model. That is the plan. As of this year, 73% of our research articles are open access. We have deeply invested in it, and that is still the goal. However, it's getting harder, and things are slowing down. And outside of Cambridge and other large publishers, we're generally seeing that open access publishing for journal articles is stalling out around 50%. So OASPA are doing this big 50% project. They just published a position paper yesterday on it. And what Cambridge wanted to do at that time, Mandy's goal, was to dig into what is stalling us out at this particular point. We did a massive research project. I'll talk more about the methodology. And what came out of this is that you cannot look at the transition to open without looking at deeper systemic issues that are underlying all of research publishing. And really what that comes down to, as the second bullet point says, is you cannot solve open without the fundamentals of how you incentivize research, why people do research, why they publish it, how it's reviewed, and of course how it's recognized. There are lots and lots of stats in the paper. I'm going to try to not overload you with stats, but one stat is that only 32% of the people that we surveyed, and this is over 3,000 people, researchers, publishers, librarians, scholarly societies, infrastructure providers, only 32% think that the publishing ecosystem is future ready. That is striking. So that is what we found. This is the title of the report. I don't have a link to the report at the slides, but it's all over the internet. It is very good SEO. So if you look up Publishing Futures, you will find it. And what we have is a 60-page, very, very detailed report with an introduction and a conclusion and recommendations about what Cambridge makes of this, what we want to do next, what we think should happen. So on the methodology, we started out doing 2 workshops and 17 interviews. Based on the results of those, we did this massive, massive survey. The results are quite interesting. The data set is open access, it's widely available, and a final workshop. The results will not surprise anyone in this room. Kind of highest level, what we saw are 4 major interlocking themes. The challenges in our space, as everyone I think in this room knows, is a lot of these problems are not just interlocking, but they sort of underlie or exacerbate other issues. For example, publishing volumes, which we'll be talking about today in terms of financial sustainability, is directly connected to misaligned incentives and reward and recognition. It also directly creates financial unsustainability. As growth explodes, so too does cost. So just very quickly, the 4 challenges that we saw were publishing volumes, both submissions and final published articles, creating financial unsustainability across the ecosystem. Because we're now in a world where authors pay to publish and libraries pay to read, not only has inequity not gone away, but there's inequity now on the read side and the publish side. And all of this is underlaid by misaligned incentives and reward and recognition. I don't have a lot in here, but we can talk about it during Q&A. A few facts before we kind of get into the business model side of things. 66% of people agreed that the move to open access journal publishing has been positive so far. Good. And almost everyone agrees that open access articles is a desirable future, which is good we tested it. However, the transition to open access has also created challenges. So of these thousands of people that we've talked to, 65% agree that OA has actually created inequality. Now, open access as a movement was meant to remove all barriers. It was meant to create equality. It's not done so in practice. 65% of people agree. It has put more pressure on the peer review system, say 47% of our respondents. And over half believe that the incentives, and Doug will talk a lot more about this, have encouraged publishers to prioritize volume and profitability over quality. And of course, funding is the key barrier to access. One thing that I thought was quite interesting, it surprised me as a former librarian, that a lot of people thought there was enough money in the system. The problem was just the money wasn't going to the right places. So 56% of people believe that if you got the money in the right place, the whole system could be sustainable. I thought that was quite interesting. And then of course, other barriers to progress open access. I'm doing a bit of a canter through this because I suspect everyone has heard this before. Lack of alignment with reward and recognition around publishing open access. Just general parts of the sector not working together. I think that's been a theme that I'm starting to hear in Charleston this year, is like we've got to start collaborating kind of broadly across the sector. Of course, inertia, lack of understanding of open research publishing. We still saw about a third of respondents, over 1,000 people, saying there's still this idea that open access quality is poor. That's open access is a sign of poor quality in 2025, which is interesting to me. And then lack of funder alignment. So what we have done in the report, and again, I did a very quick canter through this to stick to my 10 minutes. What we've done in the report is kind of lay out all the detail of what we found, and we have lots and lots of suggestions of ways to move forward. There are things that Cambridge as a university press can do on our own. There are things we have no control over. There are things we'd love to do with others. Happy to talk about that kind of generally in the Q&A, but in terms of the open article economy, I have just one final slide with 2 minutes to spare. Of sort of what we saw that we think everyone should try to bring forward. This first bullet point initially said open access business models that truly transform. At Cambridge, we're still very committed to open access. We think open is the future. We think that's right. We have made a big bet on it. But you know, there are lots and lots of models that can do what we need to do, which is transparent pricing, that allows librarians to actually be empowered to make choices that are based on transparent data, a clear understanding of value, and really aligned with their own values. There are lots of open models that will do that. It doesn't need to be a transformative agreement. Publishing equity, this is massive, and I think from what I've seen, again, my background in libraries, but also in infrastructure and now to publisher, is waivers aren't enough. It's actually ensuring that you aren't introducing any additional barriers when you create equity programs. So it should be just as seamless for researchers in every country. There shouldn't be a moment where any researcher says, oh, maybe this isn't for me. I'm not sure if I need to pay an APC or not. I'm not sure if this is right for me. That should be made as seamless as possible. And that should be a central criterion for designing all models. And then the last one, and again, doing a very quick canter for today, it's become very clear that not everything needs to be a journal article. And trying to shove everything as a journal article output is one of the major drivers for so many of the problems that we're seeing, not least of which is how much things are starting to cost. And I think we're still feeling our way around this at Cambridge of is there a place for us in this space to support these things? How can we do it? Where are we sticking our noses in where we're not wanted? But there are lots and lots of potential alternative pathways that can scale. We're seeing small things now that can scale to be larger. We're seeing other pathways that work very, very well. And if we can then create a culture where those outputs are rewarded and recognized and critical, along with all the other work that we need to do in reward and recognition of recognizing other types of academic work other than published journal outputs, that's another way to create sustainability. So with that, that is 10 minutes on the massive report and just kind of gesturing at some of the open access kind of business model issues, and we will dive in more. There is a QR code. This will get you to, I believe, a forum if you want to work on any of the issues raised in the report. But also if you need a copy of the report, if you want to chat about it, send me an email. I would love to kind of hear thoughts. We're getting lots and lots and lots of feedback from the community about it. With that, I'm exactly on time, and I will turn it over to Doug.
Awesome. Thanks, Monica. So Monica sort of talked this sort of system level view. I'm going to zoom back in to sort of library perspective and sort of think about this from a library perspective. And as I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking about this for a couple of years. One of the things that came to this realization is that my entire life the serials and journal publishing and scholarly communications have been in crisis. We think about sort of the runaway inflation of the 70s and 80s, which really led to libraries exiting the monograph marketplace there to the problems we have today. There's been just this ongoing crisis. And libraries, we didn't cause this, but we haven't solved this. And I think in some cases we've actually made things worse. So I'm going to talk about sort of three sort of areas, we call them areas of opportunity because it's never a challenge, always an opportunity. And then I'll talk about some steps I think libraries could take in my 10 minutes. So one of the things is we think about higher education, we think about publishing. These are two industries that are driven by volume. You know, both authors and publishers, when we talk about publishers, I'm really talking about here, I should back up, about APC-driven publishing here. They're both incentivized to publish more and more and more and more. Within higher ed, we've seen this shift where quantity really is more important than quality and novelty. And it's not to say that prestige has no place in higher ed publishing. It does, but prestige is underpinned by scarcity, by its very nature there. So there's only so much prestige to go around. And so how do we substitute? We substitute more and more and more versus for that prestige instead. And publishers we're seeing are just more than happy to accommodate this sort of drive for volume there. It's good for their bottom lines. They're being rational actors in a marketplace that exists there. And so when you listen to what publishers talk about on their earnings calls, when they're talking to investors that are investing in their companies, they are quick to sort of tout the built-in demand that exists, that faculty have to publish with them. And then that the growth that creates from those publications there is just good business for them. It brings in a lot of dollars there. And so there's this sort of inherent piece there. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is sort of the marketplace. When we think about the scholarly journal marketplace that exists, economists would really describe this as a failed market. What you have on one side are publishers on the supply side, you have scholars and authors on the demand side, and then we have libraries stuck in the middle between those. And that libraries in the middle actually distorts the marketplace and what leads to a lack of price sensitivity. We think about this in the subscription world. When publishers would increase the cost of journal subscriptions, the scholars and authors, they actually didn't feel that pain. Libraries felt that pain because we were the ones actually paying that bill. And you see it replicated in this sort of APC marketplace. When somebody is paying that APC either through a transformative agreement, through an APC fund, through a funder, the author actually doesn't really have to feel that pain. They may have to make some choices there, but they really don't have that sort of economic decision the same way as we do when we go out to buy a new car, like what can I afford, what do I want to afford, or the other things have to consider that. That's gone from scholarly publishing in this way with this marketplace that exists, and publishers are quick to take advantage of this reality. You see publishers talking about their goals are to publish more, to improve their acceptance rates, and really to be able to crank out more articles in a shorter time period there. And at the same time they're doing that, because of this lack of price sensitivity, they're able to increase APC costs at a rate that really outstrips anything that the market would normally be able to support there. So that's number two. And then number three is, I see the read and publish sort of, you could say it as, it's the new version of the big deal. I actually think read and publish is actually just the continuation of the big deal. And there's pros of the big deal, there's challenges with the big deal. I think one of the challenges with the big deal was it moved libraries from this transparent and consistent pricing to negotiated pricing. In a former time, we knew what a journal cost, and that cost was consistent from library to library to library. It might vary based on size or how many hospital beds you had, but when a negotiated price, it really, what you pay is based on how well you or your predecessor negotiated. And I didn't realize this, and I've written articles like, the big deal's great, until I moved from the University of Wisconsin to the University of Kentucky, where I'm at today. And when I got to Kentucky, we started looking at our journal publisher agreements. And I realized for many of our major publishers, we were literally paying twice as much at Kentucky for half the content. And you'd go to the publishers, I'd go to the publishers, and we'd talk to them and say, can you explain this? And they're like, this is just how it is. You know how it works there. And so when we logically then canceled those agreements with them, and walked away from these large-scale agreements, the most remarkable thing was, in many cases, our journal costs actually went down because those agreements that we had were actually increasing the cost of individual subscription titles faster than they would have increased in the open marketplace there. So we hear publishers talking about the bespoke and tailored agreements that they create for these read and publish agreements, and which sounds well and good, but when you look at the data, it is very clear that this is just a continuation. This is publishers locking in revenue to continue to have that revenue coming in. And again, that makes sense for them. It's partly why they're really focused on hybrid. They don't want to bring in gold journals into these agreements, because that's where the growth is opportunities there. 93% of read and publish agreements in the US saw costs stay the same or increase. Only 7% of the time, these bespoke and tailored agreements, only 7% of the time saw reduced costs for libraries. Which leads to this question for me is, do these actually transform and transition scholarly publishing? Do publishers actually even want that to happen? And when you listen to, again, what publishers are saying to investors, they see that the subscription is actually, again, a sort of, a core engine of their financial stability. They're looking at tools like AI tools as a way to underpin the value of library subscriptions. They don't see this going away. This is just part of what they're trying to do. They want both these things happening. They don't necessarily want to see a different future than they have today, because it's good for business what we have today. So, the question for me is, where do we go from here? And again, Monica sort of talked about Cambridge looks in the report. If you haven't read the report, you really should. It looks at a system level here. I want to talk about what can libraries do? What can we do in libraries? And I'll talk about 4 different things. So the first thing is to re-embrace gold open access. For whatever reason, I could probably talk about why, but libraries have walked away from green open access. And I think probably, if I had to guess, it's because faculty don't care. Faculty make it really hard to do. But libraries, we should be leveraging our technical infrastructure to make gold open access available, and we should also leverage our negotiating power to make gold open access work for us. We're having conversations, they're hard conversations with publishers, saying, send us that author's approved manuscript, so that you have that final manuscript there. If you are adding so much value to that final version of record, then this shouldn't be a threat to your business model at all there. Now we know it is, because if you see what ACS and IEEE are doing, trying to monetize gold open access, they do see it as a threat, or they see it as at least an opportunity to increase their bottom line. Second thing we should be doing in libraries is supporting diamond open access. And I'm not going to sit here and say diamond open access is the panacea. There's lots of discussions that have been happening. There's sessions here about sort of the challenges of diamond open access. And I think those critiques are legitimate and very good, and we should be having those conversations. That's not my role to fix the sort of sustainability pieces. My role in libraries, what we try to do in my library is, what's the gap, what's the hole, and I go to fill that hole. And the hole I have is my infrastructure, that most research libraries today have the ability to host online journals, and can we help fill that gap? And then the third thing is about leveraging market forces. I feel libraries should be embracing models like Subscribe to Open that disincentivize quantity. We need to be leveraging our existing spend. And then to be positive, I said we should look at models that encourage participation or discourage the free rider problem. We have prominent library leaders talking about free rider, and this is just our policy as a library, is to not engage in open access. I think that's a huge problem that we need to be thinking about solving there. And then the last thing I think libraries need to do is we need to run away from the APC. This means no read and publish agreements. This means no APC funds. I've done all of these things in my career, and I've just come to the conclusion this is not a sustainable path forward. We need to reintroduce price sensitivity. And if we're paying for authors, we're facilitating this for authors. I know this is hard to say, but if we're facilitating this for authors, they will never stop doing this. Authors will always take a free lunch. We're out at Charleston. How many librarians have had free lunches at Charleston? This is what we do here. And then we need to look at ways to incentivize quality over quantity. And I realize there's a lot of no's in the slide. It's a lot of things that are easy to say, like, this is no, 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 negative. In libraries, we like to say yes. That's why we went to these professions, because we wanted to say yes. But it isn't about being against something. This is really about being for something. It's about being for economic models that establish traditional notions of supply and demand. It's about breaking away from publisher agreements that warp concepts of value and cost. It's about a focus on quality and novelty over quantity. And most importantly for me, it's about being for a sustainable publishing ecosystem that makes sense. And at exactly 10 minutes as well, you know, Monica and I are going to have a little conversation here, so we'll both stand up here awkwardly, and
We might close this
we might close that a little bit. We could also duck down below, so.
Gotta stay behind the table.
Stay behind the table there. So,
You make me so happy.
so yeah, my first question for you is, you know, what's been the reaction to the report? So you're getting some feedback. So what are you hearing from libraries, but also from publishers? Because one of the things I think is most interesting, it's a radical step to say we should be focusing less on volume and growth.
Yeah, I think one of the things about the report that's radical is the fact that a publisher is saying it, like that we need less growth, that we need to step away from this like essentially money-making machine. I've been very pleasantly surprised by reactions from some other publishers, and I will shout them out. Lauren Kane from Bio One, the first day was like, what can I do? Richard Gallagher from Annual Reviews, lots of our own society publishers. I think a lot of mission-driven publishers, university presses and otherwise, are very, very interested. I will note, while I haven't heard from any of the large commercial publishers, submission growth is an issue for all publishers. So whether or not they're sort of interested as we are in kind of, can we focus on quality over quantity, think about models so that not everything needs to be a journal article, so we can, all of that, they will be feeling some of the same pain points. They just might have a different approach. And let's see, I think quite as I expected, again as a former librarian in this space, a lot of librarians are like, yes, we have been saying this forever, but they are, I think mostly what I'm hearing is people are gratified that there's now like thousands and thousands of surveys across the ecosystem saying these things that we've all sort of seen. And I think I've been especially happy that the groups that are working tirelessly on reward and recognition, like Dora, like Coara, are sort of like, thank you. And so actually Mandy, our managing director, is going to a bunch of workshops for Dora. We've got a lot of Coara engagement, and we'll be working with our own library on trying to kind of start locally and thinking about reward and recognition within the disciplines at Cambridge. So it's been good. And if people have been salty, they haven't said it to me, so yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
All right, my first question for you. I think I'm going to combine a few questions. I'm going to spring one on you.
All right, awesome.
You've talked a lot about kind of collective action, levers that we can push, and particularly how librarians can be empowered. I'm really gratified to hear that. I'm going to combine two, potentially three questions. In terms of this collective action, what's one thing that all librarians should do this year or stop doing? What should publishers like Cambridge do, and what should we all stop pretending about?
Okay.
Any or all of that?
I don't know, I'll get like 1/10 of that probably. Yeah, I mean, so I offered some suggestions there, I think, of what libraries should be doing. And, you know, I think we should be engaged is certainly a key piece there. And, you know, I've certainly, my institution has a very anti-APC stance in terms of how the library spends its dollars there. We do a lot of open access publishing, a lot of APC-based open access publishing with my faculty there. But I think it's understanding why you're engaging in these pieces and what makes sense, because there can be different philosophical approaches of what to be doing, why you want to engage in those pieces. I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong piece there. And I think that's part is understand why you're doing what you want to do and having those conversations on your campus. I think the other piece is that I think libraries and publishers need to be engaged in conversations there. We're all part of the same ecosystem, and to sit there and say, you know, and it's funny because I'll talk to librarians and like, well, we don't really talk to publishers, you know, we don't talk to vendors there, we're separate from them, yeah. And I don't understand that piece because we don't, you know, libraries, we think we understand publishing, but we don't. And I think publishers, I think they understand the libraries, they don't. You're the exception there, but you know, so yeah, maybe. So who knows? You've been 3 months. You may have forgotten a lot of things.
I've been brainwashed.
Yeah,
Totally
exactly.
brainwashed. Yeah.
So I think that's a big piece of it, to understand these pieces and these pressures. And we can talk about, you know, what are those things, to understand what are the pressures. Think about those integrity tools. I think almost all publishers are still looking to put in place with, you know, all the garbage that's getting submitted there. That in terms of publishing, the volumes just keep on increasing. You still have to deal with those things as they show up there. So it, you know, it may not be that, well, you know, the CPI is 3%, so that's what you should increase your prices. There may be reasons to do that. So I think that those types of conversations are really essential.
Good answer. I think you did almost all of that. Well done.
Nailed it.
How are we for time?
I know.
Okay, we have, should we each ask each other one more question?
Sure.
Here we go. What would a transparent value-aligned pricing model look like in practice? Does a good R&P deal exist? Can APCs ever be good?
I really struggle to see how APCs benefit us, because it really, it's by its very nature, by its, I don't want to use the word corrupting nature, but it's designed to sort of move things forward. You know, the idea that something should be free, that's just, you know, doesn't make sense at all. Somebody has to pay for this, whether that's people's time, or it's the very real cost of technology, or frankly, all the other pieces that go into that. I think there's a variety of paths that can go forward. I think Cambridge's model that they're looking at is one of those, and you know, but I think, you know, subscribe to open's another. I think, you know, I think the question is, how long can we live in a messy middle here as these different pieces happen there? You know, I always feel like libraries were at disadvantages when we're going up against the 5 or 6 super large publishers that have, you know, rafts of MBAs and consultants and telling them how to squeeze every dollar out of libraries as possible. And libraries, we just go along with it half the time, and because we feel like there's this need that the journal, our obsession with journals is ever present in there. So I don't have like what's the perfect model there, but I do think transparency is a key piece, and understanding. You know, I would love to have publishers say, like, here's the margin we need to have. We have to make excess revenue. I'm a nonprofit university. We make lots of excess revenue, and that gets reinvested into the university. Publishers have to be able to do that as well. And so to say, like, you shouldn't make excess revenue, that makes no sense. That's how you go out of business, and that's how things collapse there. But I think what's that level of transparency that's possible there, I think really would be the piece that would get me excited to actually have, like, here's what we got to do for this to work.
Thank you, that's really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. I know, I gotta think
We're
about
so
this.
organized.
So, I know. Well, you answered one of my questions in your
Sorry.
other, so I know, you killed that one.
We haven't practiced in front of each other.
And I had a question about transparent pricing, so, you know, you know, I guess, you know, Cambridge sort of talked about this idea that sees open as the future, and we often talk about this open future as if it's like a predestined thing. You know, like we're a bunch of Calvinists, and we know what it's going to happen in the future there. But, you know, what do you think? You know, do you think we will ever reach a world where there are no subscriptions, there's no read costs there, and it's actually a bad thing if we don't get there?
That's a good question. I think, speaking on behalf of Cambridge, I think Cambridge would say we want to get as close as is reasonable. I think what you run into with the long tail, and we see this in libraries too, is there's really, really expensive stuff, like really rights heavy things, like image heavy things that are very specialist, that will always be very, very expensive. If you try to roll that into Cambridge's model, you know, how does that affect the pricing versus letting people sort of pick and choose among the buffet of the subscription bit? So I guess what I would say is it's sort of a trade-off of, I would love to see a world where anyone can access anything, but it's that question you said of who pays and how does that get bundled in. And I think there will be some long tail things where it probably makes more sense for a small specialized group that is funded to be able to access it. Books are tricky.
Yeah.
Particularly monographs. So I think there will be these edge cases, but I think for research articles, for research content, there's no reason why we can't have a totally open future.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting you start talking about monographs, but you know, we've had conversations around sort of non-scholarly articles. What about book reviews? What about commentary? What about these pieces that seem hard to monetize
They're
there?
hard.
And I'm like, I don't want to pay for those if everything else is free. But there is value there, so I don't know how you get over that hump there.
We have a model called Research Open. So the Research Open model for journals, once we get to a certain point where enough articles are covered by kind of our own transformative agreement, we'll flip the journal for research content. So there are no APCs, no author charges, but then we have a very small subscription fee for content behind the paywall, which is non-research content, so like book reviews, that sort of thing. And it kind of allows our humanities and social science journals, which aren't funded, to find this middle ground where research articles are open access, anyone can get them, and then this content, like book reviews are so hard to fund, that they still are sort of available, and then ideally we eventually flip the whole thing to open, but it's very tricky, and DOAJ won't take Research Open into the index, which is a problem for us, so we have to figure out what we're going to do there.
Well, should we open up for questions?
We have
Why-
exactly
like
10 minutes.
Timekeeping. Wow, we didn't even practice this, so,
I know.
as you can tell.
This is what happens when librarians and publishers talk.
Yeah.
It's just magic happens. So
Time.
we don't have a mic, so unfortunately, I would say just if you could stand up and say who you are and just say who you're addressing the question to, and we'll repeat it as well from up here. Stay behind the table.
Hi, I'm Anna Creech. I'm at the University of Richmond, and when you said that libraries should embrace subscribe to open, I want to do that, but then you have a publisher just like recently saying, oh, subscribe to open fully funded all of our subscriptions, but it didn't allow us to have enough growth, so we're not doing it anymore.
Yep.
How do we, I mean, I can't trust that that's not gonna happen elsewhere.
Yeah, so, and I think, are we naming names or not? We won't name names.
I didn't name names, but you can
But,
name
yeah,
names.
they may be involved in physics, I don't know. So we'll say hypothetically, so maybe they're from America at an institute, so. So this is where transparency comes into place, that if you're a publisher and you want to go that path, you have to say, here's our growth rate that we need to grow, and here's what we're going to do with those dollars as we go to invest those dollars in there. And I think that's the key piece there. And libraries, we have to again understand that this is an essential piece here. I mean, it's not the great analogy, but if we look at what happens with Faxon and Sweats to libraries and all the pain that when these companies go out of business, they don't go quietly into the night. It's a full collapse there. And in many ways, when we think about for journal publishing and think about that key role it plays there, we have to make sure that it's a sustainable future. And they have to be articulated that. I was super disappointed by that announcement. I thought it was really, I don't see that person there. People say they're shameful in that way. So, and if you're here, come talk to me. That they went down that path. Because I think there was another way to go about that. Is just to say, here's what this growth has to look like, and here's why we have to grow by whatever that is, 5%, 6%, and then a library can make that choice. I think the other side on coming out of publishers is if you don't hit the revenue targets, it doesn't flip open. This is how you also make sure that the free riders of the world out there, they're right in the scholarly kitchen saying, I love to free ride, this is mission-based for my institution, that they actually suffer there. And that's why I like subscribe to open is, I need access to this content. The open access is just like gravy on the side there. It's really the content's the important piece there. That's why I think those models can work there. But it does come down to transparency.
Can I add to that quickly? So in a previous life, I was on an ALPS panel on Subscribe to Open, kind of from the librarian perspective, and one point that I made was, as librarians, what we can push back on is transparency, not just on what it would take to flip, but what happens if you get 90% of the way there? What happens if you get 85% of the way there? And actually, a lot of publishers can do that, but they don't know that that's helpful data. And so I think if pushing for that information, I think would be huge. Because publishers they can say they have a plan. Yeah.
I hope so.
They have a plan. Other questions?
Chuck Hemingway from Chrono 7. Just a question for either of you, a statement followed by a question. Over the years, there's been a lot of reluctance to touch the third rail of submission fees. Now, for many, many journals, any of the newer models are almost a non-starter just due to the rejection rates. And so it feels like in support of reduced quantities, higher quality, fairer dispersion of costs among the system itself, that if there's any discussion in your halls about submission fees and where that factors in this new world.
I mean, my thought is, this is a collective action problem in a lot of ways. What publisher wants to be the first one to say, yeah, we'll do it. We're going to go down that path. This will be great for business. And so I think that's one of the real challenges is that it becomes this like who's going to be the first mover on that, and I think that's probably a big barrier to making that happen.
I will say at Cambridge, it's not a conversation. I think equity is so critical to what we do. We have the Cambridge Open Equity Initiative that is really, really broad, and it just wouldn't be on the table as something that we would ever do. I will say, speaking putting on my librarian hat, submission fees are really tricky, both for what they represent, but also, I don't know if any publishers have this issue, but we saw this at Milo University where you can't use your open access fund for submission fees because you're not necessarily funding open access. You don't know what you're funding. So actually, it was a non-starter on technicalities as well. So, and then we've all seen what happened with the article with ACS and that pushback. So it's an interesting idea. I don't think it would get off the ground at Cambridge for equity reasons, and I think it's really tricky for libraries to use their APC funds for submission fees. We have time, I think, for a couple more questions.
David Weinrich with STM, which is the Publishing Trade Association. So I was really gratified to hear the comments about publishers and librarians talking together. I think that's something that we're really trying to encourage and do through at the Trade Association. We're talking to ARL and ACRL and trying to figure out how we can move forward together. But I think it takes kind of putting a lot of preconceived notions to the side. And so things about, what actually are the motivations on either side? How can we talk together about building a better scholarship? So that's my comment. But my question is, and I'm legitimately trying to think about this, and Monica and I have had discussions about this. How do you reconcile this? We're seeing a lot in the community, a push actually against publisher moderated curation and selectivity. And yet I heard in your remarks the call for more quality and curation, which I think is absolutely valuable. And in your remarks, you talked about other routes to sharing information, which will not be cost-free either. It will have a different cost structure. So how do you kind of put those ideas together for both of you?
In 2 minutes.
Yeah.
You wanna go first?
Sure, I can start. Thank you. And we have had some very good conversations about this. And so the first thing I'll say, which I say when we talk about it, is it's going to be discipline specific. So depending on disciplines, preprints might already be so established that everyone's going to archive every single day to see if they got scooped. There might be disciplines where these alternative platforms look very, very different than a preprint. I think at Cambridge what we would be keen to do is to figure out what can scale in a sustainable way. And not everything has to scale. It's not to say that everything needs to be big, but what can scale sustainably, sort of discipline by discipline, because it will be discipline specific. And then I know I sound like a broken record, but none of this will happen if there's no incentive for it. So how can we recognize those different types of outputs within the academy? I think that's where our headspace is. So one thing, as I mentioned, what we're doing with the library is we're going to be doing a bunch of workshops with the head of open research at Cambridge University Library, going department to department, and actually saying, like, what would it take to get you to, move away from automatically trying to make everything a journal article, and like, what would that take? So that's where we are. Sorry, I don't know if I've actually answered your question, but Doug will.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it comes down to this sort of sticky issue, also a collective action problem around the academic reward system there. I go to ARL meetings, and it's like, where the libraries are like, oh, university president, you should solve this. And the president's like, oh, it's not me, it's the provost. And the provost's like, it's not me, it's the department chair. And the department chair's like, it's the faculty. And the faculty, it's the discipline. The discipline say, well, we can't do it, the university decides what that is. And it's like this circular firing squad. But I feel like that's the piece where this starts to change. I mean, I agree we should be, not everything needs to be an article. I worry about, all the mis and disinformation that's out there as well. What does that quality control look like? Are we going to outsource all that to AI? Because that seems also like a bad idea as well. And so I don't know the solutions, but I do think it starts with conversations. And for me, where I'm at, it might, I like coming to Charleston, but I really like going to places where there's not, the librarians are in the minority here, and we have these interesting conversations, and I'm like, what? And then I say things, people are like, what? Because that's where we learn from each other. I think we need more of that today, because we just don't have that. We just, like society, we go to our own camps, and we just sort of reinforce what we think there. And so I think it starts with a little vulnerability, and say we don't have all the answers, and then openness to learning and discussing. So.
We are exactly at time. Thank you so much.
So.